Ladies and gentlemen, today is March 4th, 2020, and on behalf of the Director of the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center, Mr. Jeffrey Mangelsdorf, and the entire staff of the Army Heritage and Education Center and the U.S. Army War College, welcome to the first lecture of the 2020 Perspectives in Military History Lecture Series. The USAC and the U.S. Army War College sponsor the Perspective Series to provide us a historical dimension to the exercise of generalship, strategic leadership, and the warfighting institutions of land power. In addition, as always, we like to extend a warm thank you to the Army Heritage Center Foundation and everything they do to support us here at the Army Heritage and Education Center. As you saw walking in, the books for tonight are on sale behind the room. When we're out from those. So if you're interested in purchasing a book, make sure you get out there first to buy one. All the proceeds from the book sales do go to the foundation to help support what we do here at the AHEC. So with that, it's my great honor to introduce tonight's speaker. Martin King is a highly acclaimed author and historian and is widely regarded as a leading authority on European military history. In addition to having written numerous books about World War II, he has spoken frequently to American servicemen and women at military bases across Europe and the U.S. Mr. King has also worked as a historical consultant and writer for the History Channel. In 2015, Mr. King's documentary, Searching for Augusta, received 7 Emmy Awards, including Best Historical Documentary. His book, The Fighting 30th Division, They Called Them Roosevelt's SS, received a nomination in the U.S. for the Distinguished Writer Award. Mr. King is also an honorary citizen and chosen cultural ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Martin King.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you. I love a good send-off, you know. I love a good build-up. And that was a good one. I appreciate that. First and foremost, I'd like to thank every single one of you for coming here tonight to learn something about your history. There is some claim that it's mine, but it isn't. This was your battle. You won it. It was your victory. So you could get over there and claim it as your own now. As you can hear, I'm not from Belgium. Don't hold that against me. My wife is. She's here tonight. Now, the Battle of the Bulge was, oh, I love the rostrum bit. Well, that really does make me want to say, dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. You know, there's something empowering about rostrums. I was at the one in the Pentagon with my co-author and dear friend who's here tonight. And we were so surprised they let us out of the Pentagon after that. It was amazing. We thought we were going straight to Gitmo. But it was fantastic. And basically, this battle changed everything. Look at the situation here. In September, November 1944. Now, what you had, basically, the Allies, we were on a roll. We'd gone across France. Patton had gone way too fast. The supplies couldn't keep up with the man. We'd got right into Germany. We were on a winner, but we made far too many erroneous assumptions. We thought the Germans were finished. Patton knew they weren't. Patton said, and I quote, there are still 6 million Krauts who can pick up a rifle, they're not done yet. But Patton, who claimed to be a great historian, was maybe a good historian when it came to antiquity. The Greeks he knew quite a lot about. He should have done, he was one. He'd been there before. He said, when the Germans hit us, they're going to hit us in the Alsace. The Alsace. The Alsace. I'm going to put my Third Army there. He was pretty convinced that that would be the case. So he puts his army right down underneath Luxembourg in the Alsace, the whole Third Army. But he got into a fight there around Metz. There were 14 forts around Metz, and they were all heavily fortified. And then the rains came. Now, up in the northern shoulder, Courtney Hodges was pouring men into the Hurtgen Forest, depriving the US Army of every tactical advantage it had had up until that point. So what was the strength of the Allies? And I'm going to say specifically the US Army in 1944. The strength was they could move. They could displace from one point to the next. And the other thing was that they had air superiority. The Germans didn't have much Luftwaffe left. They couldn't get many planes into the sky. They poured them into the Hurtgen Forest, into an area where basically they deprived themselves of that strategic advantage. So what you had is 2 points, north and south. And in between that 2 points is an 89-mile gap where there was only 4 divisions. Now, 2 of those divisions were in bad repair because they'd been in the Hurtgen Forest. They'd seen it. Ernest Hemingway went in there and said, "This is worse than Passchendaele. This is hell." He knew what the situation was. They take the 4th Division out. They take the 28th Division out. They put the 28th Division just at the border of Luxembourg and Belgium. They put the 4th Division down in there. That's where you're going to get some rest and relaxation, guys. That's the honeymoon area. Nothing ever happens there. Now, this is the importance of reading your history books, right? Because if General George Patton, God bless him, would have read his, he would have known that the Germans had been through the Ardennes before. 1870, Franco-Prussian War. Through the Ardennes, 3 armies. 1914, von Schlieffen Plan. Through the Ardennes, 3 armies. 1940, invasion of the West. Through the Ardennes, 3 armies. 1944, what are they doing? Patton's in the Alsace. He knows something's going off, he doesn't know what. Now, the attacking German forces at the time, they'd amassed 3 armies. Why didn't we know about this? Where was Ultra? Where was the intelligence? Well, Kenneth Strong, who was known as the Chinless Wonder to Montgomery, he said, "I've heard a lot about the Germans building up forces along the border." They knew the Germans were moving forces from the east to the west, but they didn't know why. Now, the general assumption, and this again is an erroneous assumption, was that they were going to wait until we attacked them. That was the idea. They were building up forces for when we went on the offensive in February the following year. That wasn't what was going to happen. But what exacerbated a bad situation was radio silence. The Germans locked down, radio silence, 10 days before this offensive went in. They managed to mass 3 armies. So, 6th Army, mainly SS, Joseph Sepp Dietrich. Dietrich was a shadow of the man he'd been 3 years earlier. The Bavarian butcher's son was a drunk. He was a broken alcoholic who couldn't put 3 words together in a sentence. Never mind command a whole army. When Adolf Hitler says, "Sepp, could you take Antwerp?" He was like a nodding dog. "Yeah, of course I can. Yeah, sure I can." He would say anything Adolf wanted to hear. He was a sycophant and a drunk. The best army are in the center. Hasso Eckhard Freiherr von Manteuffel, a real baron. Hitler had no affection for the aristocracy, but this man was a good general. He'd served with Rommel. He knew how to command an army. This guy, commanding the 7th, Erich Brandenberger, you wouldn't let him organize a stag night at a whiskey distillery. He was not the right man for the job, in other words. Gerd von Rundstedt. This man got sacked quite a lot. And every time he got sacked, he got reinstated. He didn't agree with the plan, but he didn't dare say. He dared to say, "Walther Mödel, mein Führer, you can't do this. It's a bad idea. We don't have the resources. You're a coward, man. No, I've been on the Eastern Front for 3 years. Nothing to do with cowardice. It's common sense. We don't have the resources. What we need to do is do like the Romans did. What is the oldest adage in the paybook? What did Cicero write? What did Julius Caesar write in La Bello Gallica? Divide et impera, divide and conquer. And that's the idea. That's what they want to do. Divide and conquer. But how are they going to do it? There's old Joseph. That's when he was sober. There's Manteuffel. Brandenburger, coming up any second now. He's looking rather angry there, probably because he didn't want to get promoted. The Allied forces. At the top of the chain, we've got Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, Ike takes a lot of flack from historians. And I've read MacDonald and the rest of the guys, and they say, yeah, he was a great diplomat, he was this, he was that, but he wasn't a great soldier. I think he was. Cometh the man, cometh the hour. He was the right man at the right time. He made a wonderfully intelligent, calculated decision. You got the First Army, commanded by General Courtney Hodges. They're stuck in the north, they're fighting around the Hartgen. You got the Third Army with George Patton, 12th Army Group, Alma Bradley. Alma Bradley and Ike, whoa, big friends. They've been at West Point together, these lads. We've been there 4 times. And they still let us back. They invite us very frequently. So they've been at West Point together. Anything Bradley wants doing with the 12th Army Group, he gets on the phone, Ike, can I have this, can I have that? He'll get it. He'll get it. It will get done. And you got this little guy, Bernard Law Montgomery. Well, he went down with the American High Command like a digestive complaint in a crowded elevator. He was not popular. Was he good? I think he was. He had his charms. He had his abilities. And these are the lads, as you see them coming here. Old blood and guts, the Third Army. There you go. He's up for it, is George. I'm a good friend of his granddaughter, who sells Patton beer, Patton champagne, Patton pens, Patton socks. And he's not afraid of the camera. And she's a lovely lady and a dear friend. Now you see, Monty, he was a cautious man. And that used to really, really upset the top guys at SHAEF. It used to upset them. He was a cautious man because he'd been in World War I. So he was a guy, basically, this is the German plan, right? It's straightforward. Antwerp had been taken in early September 1944, but it was useless. We got a dock, and we couldn't use it because the estuary was still in the hands of the Germans. It took until the 28th of November to actually open that estuary. When that estuary was open, we could now supply the armies in the north straight from Antwerp. So here are the objectives. The spearhead are the 6th Panzer Army. What you don't see here, and what every military commander should take into consideration, is terrain. Terrain, terrain, terrain. Choose your ground. Choose the ground where you're going to fight. And that's what they didn't do. Now, I mentioned 2 divisions, the 4th and the 28th, but there were 2 others. The 99th Division and the 106th Division. And at this juncture, I have to mention a dear friend of ours who passed yesterday night. We were at his bedside, who was with the 106th Infantry Division. Dear man, he was right in the middle. They were green. They'd never fire a shot in anger. But they were good. They were keen. And they were going to disrupt a lot of plans. So there's the situation. On the 18th of December 1944, the battle starts at 5:30 in the morning on the 16th of December. 3 armies attack simultaneously. Now, the general consensus of opinion is the Germans attack, the Americans retreat. Didn't happen like that. What you were doing, in fact, was buying time, buying valuable time. They made redouts. They would hit, harry, kill, run. Hit, run, hit, run. And they would stagger the German advance. Now, the thing is about terrain is if you've got a 69-ton tank, right, that's a beauty. That's packing an 88. That's going to be accurate up to 5 miles. That will put a hole through a Sherman like a hot knife through butter. It's a devastating weapon, but it's no good if it's in between trees or up a steep hill or in a narrow lane. Now then, what happens is that there are two cities, Saint-Vith and Bastogne, that are pivotal to this whole thing. Now, Saint-Vith has rail links going all the way to Germany. Bastogne, if you look at a topographic map, it's on a platform. 7 roads converge on that town. So obviously it had strategic advantage. Now, we are fortunate. Blessed we are tonight. I would not have written a word without the assistance of a man who I think is a better detective than Sherlock Holmes. He's the best researcher I've ever had the good fortune to work with. We wrote 6 books together. One of those books was called The Tigers of Bastogne, which was dedicated to the memory of his grandfather, who was right there in Bastogne. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Mr. Michael Collins. All right, Mike.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. When Martin and I began doing research, I didn't really realize what was out there for different archival information, but we really would just be Skyping. We used to actually call each other on the phone first, but then we got to Skype and really work off of each other. He would find different places that I should be doing research, and I would go to the National Archives in College Park and make it happen. But really, the big thing with the 10th Armored Division was that, yes, they were sitting in the Alsace area in France. A couple of different units were in Germany. But the big issue was that they had their baptism of fire in Metz, and thankfully they were getting re-equipped. They were getting rearmed. So they were actually in good shape when they had to move north to Bastogne. The main issue, though, was that they didn't really know what was going on. Every veteran I talked with from the 10th Armored Division said, well, yeah, we just were told just move north. And some of them just went along for the ride. And some actual units got split up. Some members of one unit that should have been in Luxembourg were sent to Bastogne. So it's been very interesting to hear these different stories. And the main issue, there's our book right there. The main issue, though, for the 10th Armored was really how do you defend a area, especially in Bastogne, that has all these different roads going in, and they set up different teams throughout, and it really became a holding action. The 28th Division was, of course, retreating from Luxembourg. The 9th Armored Division, which also does not get any real actual acclaim for what they did. They held on long enough that the 10th could make it there. And then, of course, the 101st came in, which, of course, many people think that it was just the 101st. But if it wasn't for the tankers and the artillery of the 10th, they wouldn't have been able to get there as well. If you do watch Band of Brothers, the only 10th Armored member who is featured is Jimmy Fallon, who hosts that really great late show on NBC. So he's the only representation of the 10th Armored Division in Band of Brothers. But the big thing was that you had different teams. One of them was Team Desiree, who was up in the town of Noville. And they really, they had to deal with pretty much being on the low ground. The Germans were up on a ridge. They had tanks that were just zeroed in. And again, you had some Shermans. You had a few of larger tank destroyers as well, but they really were out on an island to their own. And if it wasn't for also the airborne troops coming in, Bastogne would have been overrun within a few days. And the big thing, if Martin wants to go ahead here, in the south you had Team O'Hara. They also were doing a holding action, and they really were just trying to block all the different roads. And Martin, if you want to go to the next one. And on the 21st, you start to get the encirclement. And this is where things are getting dire. They're trying to get as many wounded out as they could. I spoke with one veteran who actually is still alive outside of Boston, and he got wounded in Noeville. And he literally was yelling to the ambulance driver, "Get us out of here." And he was able to get out before they were encircled. But it became pretty much a game of save the artillery. The 420th Field Armored Artillery really were the stars of the show. They had 360-degree access to the Germans. So pretty much they had to be protected and preserved. 28th Division and 9th Armored Survivors, they formed a group called Team Snafu, and they were the fire brigade. They would go from one place to another.
Snafu. Situation normal, all fouled up.
Very true. That's right. Now, ironically, we were able to interview Willis D. Krittenberger, who actually he was
what a guy.
He was great, and
he was a star.
He actually had to take over for his commanding officer, who was killed on Christmas Eve, 1944, and he talked about how they literally just laid out a map and pretty much just made every little quadrant and said, well, we're going to have 3 guns go there, 3 guns go there, and 3 guns go there, and they just saturated the entire area. Of course, the problem was they were running out of ammunition. I'll go up to.
Okay. So then we missed out the 22nd, which was significant because of the ultimatum.
Yeah, now, the big thing, you might know, of course, the guy named General McAuliffe. I think we've all heard of Mr. McAuliffe. Now, of course, he was put in a very difficult position because, of course, General Taylor, who was supposed to be with the 101st, was not with them when they had to get out to Bastogne and hold the line. So General McAuliffe, he had to become the commanding officer. And, of course, he was given quite an ultimatum. Martin, do you want to get into that?
It was a good one. Yeah, it was a good one. The thing was that the 2 Germans that approached some guys from the 327th Glider, the 2 Germans that approached them, waving a white flag, said, "We have a message for your commander." So they took these 2 guys to McAuliffe's office. And the first guy they met was Harry O'Kinnard, who was a G3 man. And Harry says, "What's all this about?" And they said, "Well, we've got a surrender ultimatum for you." So Harry takes the ultimatum and he shows it to General McAuliffe. And Tony McAuliffe said, "What's this, Harry?" He said, "It's surrender from the Germans." He said, "Oh, the Germans want to surrender." And Harry said, "No, they want us to surrender." And he said, "Ah, nuts. Listen, Harry." And he actually dictated a 2-page reply. He was an articulate man, an erudite, intelligent man, West Pointer, and not profane. That was Patton's department. McAuliffe wasn't profane. And he said to Harry when he'd finished, he said, "Harry, read that back to me." And Harry reads it back. And he said, "What do you think of that?" And Harry Kennard says, "I think your first response was the best." He said, "What was that?" He said, "What you always say in these situations, nuts." He said, I can't say nuts to the Germans." He said, "Of course you can." He said, "Yeah, I can." So he took a piece of paper and wrote nuts with an exclamation mark. He says, "Take that to them." So they did. They took the paper back to 2 jokers called Bayerlein and Cocotte. So the general of the 26th Volksgrenadier and the general of the dangerous Panzerlehr. These guys get the ultimatum. They open the paper and they say, Nütz? Was ist das? Nütz, das ist Nüssen, ja, Nüssen. And they ask a young officer who speaks good English, is it a positive or a negative reply, Michael?
Well, yeah, they at first said, well, really, what is that? And of course, they said, no. That pretty much means go to hell.
That's the way. Go to hell. And you know, at no given time during the siege of Bastogne, were the defenders outnumbered by the attackers. They were roughly the same. Now, the first week during the Battle of the Bulge, the fog was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That worked to the advantage of the American defenders, because the Germans didn't know how many Americans were there, and the Americans didn't know how many Germans were attacking them. What they didn't know, those 2,300 men from the 10th Armored Division who were manning those 3 outposts, the 3 main approach roads, in fact, defended them with the 101st, helped with the 101st, who dug in. Hell, we didn't need Patton. That's what they said to me. Well, they were roughly the same. On the 23rd of December, something amazing happened.
Well, and finally they got relief. The C-47s flew right on over, and for many, it was really about the ammunition and food, and of course medical supplies as well, but especially those artillery men, they were running very low. They had to be very careful what they fired, and it really was, many veterans almost saw them as angels in the sky. But there was also another story involving that.
They was running out of medics because Jack Pryor and his lot up at Noville had lost quite a few, so they went around scouting for nurses, and 2 Belgian nurses volunteered on the 20th of December. One of them was Renée Lemaire, and the other one was Madame Auguste Chiwi. Who is that guy, Mike?
Well, so Jack Pryor, he actually was a doctor from Vermont, went to medical school, joined up the Army. He was only allowed to join up when he completed his medical training. That's what his mother said. He said, either you become a doctor, and if you do that, then yeah, sure, you can go into the military. But this man, he actually almost allowed himself to be captured in Noville during the fighting. He was taking care of patients. The Germans, of course, were getting closer, and he said, no, I'm going to stay here. And, of course, all the officers said, no way. If you get captured, we're going to have one less doctor to really keep us alive. So he reluctantly left Noville to go back towards Bastogne.
That was when they met 50 years later. That was Nurse Renée Lemaire. When the skies opened and the C-47s made quite possibly the most accurate drop of World War II, they'd actually sent in Rangers that morning to mark out the DZs and the LZs. These Rangers had done a good job. By the way, they were the only airborne who parachuted into Bastogne. The other guys, the 101st Airborne, they came up in tank transporters, in trucks. But there was another airborne unit, the 82nd, who were on the northern shoulder. Now, the difference between these two units is very, very simple. Very simple. 101st, dig in and hold on. 82nd, you're up against the SS, take the fight to the enemy. And did they? Remember Albert Tarbell?
That's right. First Mohawk to be in the 82nd, that's right.
Best scout they ever had, Mike.
Yeah.
Now, the Germans actually wrote in some of their notes we're being attacked by Indians on the northern shoulder. Albert was the real deal. He was a Mohawk with the haircut and the war paint. And he used to talk to the trees before he went out on patrol. And he'd come back to his commander at H Company, a guy called, who's still alive, 102 years old. Oh, what a guy. James Maggie Magellas. He said Albert was the best scout you could ever have. He would report back to me, he said, so what's the situation, Albert? He said, well, there were 6 Germans over there by the river. There were 2 over there by the cabin. There was 1 over there on the bridge, and there were 3 on the other side of the bridge. I said, oh, come on, Albert, leave some for us, will you? He was too good at his job. He ended up working. What was his job after the war?
He was one of the Skywalkers. He did all
Absolutely.
the ironworks down in New York City.
Wonderful. You see, when we write a book together, our job doesn't end when the book's finished. We keep tabs on these veterans. We follow them. We follow them everywhere. We look after them. We write to them. We Skype with them. And we keep in touch with them because we love them. On the 24th of December, when the skies had opened for the C-47s, it opened for the Luftwaffe too, Mike.
Well, and this became really an easy target, of course. You didn't really have too many anti-aircraft defenses. You did have a battalion of armored anti-aircraft, as they used to call them, the wood choppers. They were 4 50 caliber machine guns on the back of pretty much a trailer that they could bring to different areas. Now, the issue is that, of course, a lot of people were out and about. They were trying to rearm, re-equip in Bastogne, and really it left that night as a night of terror.
It was a terrible night indeed. Around about 8 o'clock, first of all, the Germans, they were actually using, the aircraft they were using were not actual bombers, but the first round they made, they were dropping incendiaries to light up the place. The second round they made, they flew very, very low, and then they start dropping 500-pound bombs on Bastogne. One of them hit the aid station where Renée Lemaire was working. That is the best photograph we know of the aid station after the bombing. That's where Augusta was working, where Renée was. Augusta, she'd gone next door to have a glass of champagne with Jack Pryor. And it was a bottle of champagne. They'd actually been washing in champagne. There was no electricity. There was no water. They'd been washing in champagne. They'd been disinfecting wounds with 5-star cognac. That's all they had. There was no morphine. They were tearing up bed sheets for bandages. They were in a bad way. Actually, Augusta Shuey participated in an amputation of a foot and a hand without anesthetic. She could do that. Renée couldn't do that. Renée was the wiping the brow and holding the hand angel of Bastogne, and a wonderful lady that she was. Now, Augusta's next door having a glass of champagne. The 500-pound bomb drops. Augusta gets blown clean through a wall. Clean through. And she was only a tiny lady. She got up. What the heck was that? Some good champagne you've got there. Dear me. And she said, oh, we better go and see what the situation is at the aid station. There was no aid station. It had gone. It had been completely flattened. The following day, Augusta Shuey volunteers to work with the 101st Airborne. The situation on the 25th of December is quite dire. Can you point out what's happening over here, Mike?
Well, yeah.
Where are your boys from the 10th Armored Division?
Well, they're still kind of, they're, at that point, of course, they're really hunkered down, but really up in the, let's see, the Champs area, you have, and Saint-Champs as well, you have the 420th. And at that point, the Germans realized, well, that's where the artillery is. We need to attack them. So the 101st and the 10th Armored pretty much just created a barrier between the Germans and the 420th Artillery. And literally what they did, and this is why I called that the quad 50 calibers, the wood choppers, well, they literally pointed them all at the Germans and just sprayed the woods all around Saint-Champs and pretty much annihilated the threat. So actually, and they also pointed their artillery just like a tank in a way. You know, again, this is where when you get it straight from the commander who was there, Willis D. Krittenberger, and when he also gives you his typed out summary, which was very nice.
It was an amazing guy.
You get a much more clear picture of what was actually going on, because sometimes you'll see a report in an archive and it's actually missing a lot of the minute details that someone on the ground would have provided.
How cold was it?
Oh, well, you'd think maybe being in a tank would be a good thing. Well, no, it wasn't. We had a tanker who was from Connecticut who said his feet froze just because his feet were on the cold steel. But yet we had Zeke Proust, who was a tank retriever. He was in a tank retriever to pretty much pick up Jeeps and other vehicles. And he was lucky because the transmission he used gave a little bit of heat off and kept his feet from freezing. But it was just brutal. And actually, many a veteran said that's why a lot of them went down south, because once the cold hit, they would have that tingly feeling.
Allow me to explain that in a Scottish way. I like a draft up my kilt. I love it. In fact, I would challenge any man to stand on a hillside near where I live in Dunkeld. Stand on that hillside with the wind blowing through your hair and a draft blowing up your kilt. It will put a smile on your face you cannot remove with a Black & Decker sander. I guarantee you. But there's cold and they're silly. Almost 2/3 of the casualties incurred there were due to weather-related conditions. Hypothermia, trench foots, no fun. One guy I met, James Hannay Jr., the guy, he was a Boston man. I thought he had a speech impediment. He thought I had one. He couldn't say Normandy, you know. But James, when he went back to the States, he moved to Florida. And I met him 70 years after the fact. He decided to come back and have a look. And it's the middle of the summer, and it's sweltering hot out in the Ardennes. And we went up onto the ridge where he'd been, and he said, "Look at that, son." And he's pointing at his feet, and I'm looking for a war wound or a bullet hole. And what are you pointing at, Jim? I can't see it. I can't see it. He said, "It's the middle of summer, isn't it?" I said, "I'd noticed that. I'm not a summer person. I don't look good in Speedos. The two halves don't match anymore." You know, anyway. He says, "Listen, look at that again." He was wearing 4 pairs of socks in the middle of summer. I said, "Why is that, Jim?" He said, "My feet haven't been warm since 1944. Then I get Mike to go to the archives in DC and look at the medical records for this man. When he took his boots off, his toes came off with it. And that's why he couldn't get his toes warm. He didn't have any to get warm. That was not unusual. Cold was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. So you're fighting a determined enemy. You're fighting the elements. On Christmas Day, a big attack goes in. Bastogne takes on another significance. All units to Bastogne. What's happening with these guys, Mike?
Well, finally, you've got relief. There had been rumors, the rumor mill of Patton's coming. It finally came true. The 4th Armored Division finally racing up. They made it to the outskirts of Bastogne. There's actually a tank. We were actually having a discussion about where this tank is right now. But there is a tank that they actually painted on the side first in Bastogne.
Yeah.
And
it was here for a while. We know it was at Vilsec Barracks, but the guy who drove it was a guy called Charles Bulge. And Charles came back to Bastogne in 1984, and I saw him. And they took him around the city in a Sherman tank. And he passed away shortly after that, God bless him. But he had the first in Bastogne. And his boss was Abrams, wasn't it?
Yeah, Abrams, yep.
Yeah, whom we interviewed. Was that?
No, it was Erzik.
You're right. So, Christmas Day, there was a big attack went in. Christmas, well, day 1, 26, Boxing Day we call it in the United Kingdom. Patton breaks through here. Now, the wonderful thing about the French language is that when you pronounce it, it sounds nice. Assenois. Not ass noise, which is what it got called. Patton breaks through, but look at this here. Look at this. See that corridor there, right? That's only a mile wide. He's running the gauntlet, but he gets through to Bastogne. You can now take out your wounded. You can now bring in ammunition. The fight isn't over yet. The reduction of the Bulge is a gradual thing. But you've got the 1st Army coming down from the north. You've got the 3rd Army coming up from the south. And it's the biggest pincer action ever orchestrated in the Western theatre. But the most amazing thing about this, now, Patton, love him or hate him, let me tell you something about Patton. To disengage from one front, turn around a whole army 90 degrees and send them to another fight, took a certain amount of discipline. To be able to do that, you had to be good. You had to have the respect of the guys underneath you. Patton had that. Patton had that. 350,000 men. That's not counting auxiliary staff. Maybe roughly around 500,000 moving north. They closed the Bulge. All blood and guts. This man passed yesterday, and we're going to miss him.
Oh.
That's Augusta Huey, with me and Mike.
Which, by the way, everyone, she knew English. I was able to get a little bit out of her because
Yeah.
I would say, Augusta, you know English, and you'd kind of give me this little wry smile, and I said, no, I know you do. And she would actually say a little bit.
She knew English, and she knew some words she picked up from the GIs,
Yeah.
which were a little bit fruity. But she was a star. We worked hard and campaigned for this lady who remained silent about what she'd seen and heard for 70 years. What happened? What was the title that she gets, Mike?
She finally was given knighthood. She was knighted by the Kingdom of
King
Belgium.
of Belgium. Right. That is the Emmy Award-winning documentary. This was our first book. This was the most difficult book we ever wrote because we actually recorded. We've been meticulous about recording and filming every single veteran we've spoken to over the years and maintaining this archive and making it available to academics and schools and whoever basically wanted to use it. It's been a labor of love. It was one of the first books to be released with a DVD in the cover. And there are some stars there. We have one of the last survivors of the Malmedy Massacre there. Big Eagles fan.
Yeah.
Ted Paulucci. This is the Tigers of Bastogne. Because of Band of Brothers, well, there were too many mistakes made about that. You know, assuming that it was just the 101st. Right.
And we decided, you know, we got to fix some of this.
Yeah.
You know, the real story needed to be told. Of course, the 101st did an amazing job of helping to really break the stone wall in Bastogne, but really it was about getting the real story through. But we didn't want Jimmy Fallon to just be the only image of the 10th Army.
On the 16th of January, the 1st Army meet the 3rd Army in Houffalize. It's all over. The greatest American victory in World War II. The biggest land battle in United States military history. And one you should celebrate and commemorate and venerate. Now, Mike and I did a little survey. He went to his old alma mater, and I went to a school in Bastogne, and I asked 20 students, what's the Battle of the Bulge? And they all said, we know what it is, because every 15 minutes in Bastogne, a bell rings to remind the people of Bastogne of how expensive their freedom was. Your guys, 5 of them said, we think it might be a weight loss program. And 2 of them knew what it actually was. But anyway, I want to thank every single one of you who come to see us tonight. And do buy our books because we support a lot of veterans. The 4th Infantry Division, the 30th Infantry Division, the 10th Armored Division, the 106th Division, all these guys. And they've all been heroes to us and become great friends of ours, people we've loved and cared about for 20 years and continue to do so. And there are not many left now. But I want you to venerate them now. And I want you to remember the 16th of December. Not just Christmas Day, because if you're in Bastogne on the 16th of December, it can get a little bit lively. It's bigger than Christmas there. They celebrate it. They honor your boys. And I think we should honor them too. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Right, mate. Get your selfies here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have about 15 minutes for questions and answers. Again, please raise your hand. Myself or Shannon will come to you with the microphone so we can go ahead and get started. Who's got our first question for tonight? Right here in the middle.
Did you interview any of the German soldiers opposing?
Yes.
Any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll make that short and sweet. Did you ever hear about the Malmedy Massacre, where 83 American POWs were summarily executed by the SS? I went out to track down the perpetrators, and I found the man who gave the order to shoot. His name was Hans Siptrott. He was in the 1st Division SS, Liebstandarte Adolf Hitler. He was 96 when I met him and interviewed him. I interviewed a witness to the crime, a man called Bernd Pfeiffer, who was in the cafe, who saw everything that happened. And then I flew to Philadelphia to speak to one of the survivors of the massacre. But the Germans were integral. You see, they weren't all SS. That was just mainly Northern Shoulder. I met a lot of guys. There was one guy I brought from Dusseldorf. Do any of you know a TV series called Greatest Tank Battles? I don't know if you've heard about this, right? Well, I wrote that series, and I appeared in a few of the episodes. And for one of the episodes, I interviewed a guy. This is the most amazing story, a guy called Hans Herbst. We brought him with a taxi from Dusseldorf to Belgium. It's about 3 hours with a cab. And we got him there for 9 o'clock in the morning, and the man spoke on camera continuously for 15 hours without stopping for a break or going for a pee, anything. 15 hours straight. I had a Canadian film crew with me who were pulling their hair out. 2 were in tears and 1 had already left, you know, and he kept going. And Hans Herbst had the luckiest escape of any German soldier because he was firing something called the Panzerfaust, and he faced off against a Sherman M4A1. The Sherman M4A1 turned its turret towards him, shells in the cannon, and Hans releases his Panzerfaust, and it just glances off the cannon from this Sherman. The Sherman returns fire, but what Hans didn't know, he was stood there waiting to die. What he didn't know was that his Panzerfaust had slightly bent the cannon. So the shell exploded in the cannon. The crew survived, and so did Hans. He said, "You could not see my backside for the dust cloud." He said, but American cigarettes were great. He enjoyed the Luckies, and the food was better than they were getting. So yeah, the Germans, in every book we wrote, we put accounts of the Germans as well. You know, I'm not speaking in defense of them per se, but you know, there were guys who'd been press ganged into this, who didn't want to be there. The SS were a different case. The SS that they used at the Battle of the Bulge, I interviewed a few of these guys, and some of them were still feisty. We met one guy, Hans Cressman, Knight's Cross. Erwin Cressman, Knight's Cross holder. 7 foot, this man. Straight as a die. Proud man. SS. He walked into the Holiday Inn where we were filming in a reception room, and he had a woman with him who looked like an extra from a Wagnerian opera. She had the hair and the plaits, and was quite bumptious. I thought she was quite attractive. And I said, "Mr. Cressman, can I offer you and your daughter a drink?" He said, "My daughter?" He said, "This is my mistress. My wife is at home." He was 93. So yeah, we interviewed them. Any more questions?
All right. Who's got our next question? Right here up front.
I don't need the mic, but I'll use it, Barton. Question I posed to you earlier today.
Yes, Joe.
Did you have a chance to interview any intel people? Because I am frankly surprised we didn't know the Germans were doing everything they were doing. And the 28th Infantry is Pennsylvania Division. That's a bloody bucket.
National Guard.
And they got beat up in the Hurricane too a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, we were too dependent on Ultra. The whole Allied situation was too dependent on Ultra. And by December 1944, we were freely sharing information. The problem actually occurs, I think, in the chain of command, where we have the intelligence, but the further it goes up, it begins to dissipate. And by the time he gets to Omar Bradley, he said, they know we're going to attack them. The guys from the 106, they said something about, Yeah.
Actually, Francis Curry, a Medal of Honor recipient, who was
Francis.
about 18 when he received his medal. He always quipped. He said, "Yeah, Army intelligence," because of course he and his men were. There was about 5 or 6 of them were stuck in some foxholes, and they literally said, "Don't worry, nothing's coming through here." Of course, then all of a sudden, German tanks rolled through, yeah,
SS tanks, my
yeah,
friend.
SS,
That was
yeah.
150th Brigade, Otto Scorzini.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and so intelligence was to some GIs it was pretty much useless for some of them. But again, that's right on the up on the front lines, and such as an Omar Bradley might have been seeing things a little bit different.
Yeah, but Omar Bradley, right? This is what amazes me about this guy is that he heard the information. He was getting information from the 28th. They actually captured 2 Germans. And the 2 Germans said to them, "Hey, we've got a whole army behind us here, Hey, here we get ready, lads. Oh, party time for you lot." And they took them to the HQ of the 12th Army Group. And they interrogated them. And they said, don't believe them. It's propaganda. It's rubbish. Don't believe it. And so it dissipated. The higher up the chain of command it went. And then, of course, with the Germans having radio silence, you see, the whole premise of our intelligence came on intercepting information, comms between the units. We couldn't intercept comms because they weren't making any. Now, what we should have had then, we couldn't have, in that film with Henry Fonda flying around in a park tent, come on. Nothing was flying. Nothing was getting up there. Yeah. Piper Cub, yeah. No, and it was a failure of intelligence. But again, from the Allied side, we made far too many assumptions of saying that the Germans were finished. The Germans were not finished, and we should have had an inkling because we knew they weren't just moving divisions from the east to the west. They were moving armor from east to west. And we should have known. We should have put 2 and 2 together and made the conclusion that this area needed to be defended instead of left open with a gap. Yeah, please, any more questions? Sir, how you doing? Good to see you. Oh, dear me. Yeah, long time.
Sorry, Graham's not here, but he's on holiday.
Oh, God bless you.
Martin King, Randy Galkian. Good to see you again since 2010.
Great to see you, Randy.
Can you, the two of you, kind of say the top 3 or 4 things that won for the American side? And my other question, I'll do a real quick sneak one. If there was one battle where the Americans could have lost and the side could have changed, is there a turning point in that sense that you can think of?
Yes. Yes. The one that could have lost quite decisively was the Hurtgen. The thing is with the Hurtgen, there were dams. The Schwammenau Dam was in there. And, the myth of the dam busters. The British didn't blow up all the dams. And most of these bombs didn't even work. It was propaganda. The dams were still there, and they were still supplying hydroelectricity to the whole Ruhr area. So the Hurtgen was a problem. Now, if you speak to a German officer and I spoke to many from the 116th Windhunddivision, the Greyhound Division, I spoke to a lot of these guys, they said, well, the Battle of the Bulge is actually part 1 and part 2, and we won part 1. And it's actually true. They did. The thing is, you see, if our intel would have been good enough, we would have known there were 2 strands of the Siegfried Line running straight through the middle of that forest. That forest was mined, wired, and waiting. We walked into a trap there. And the biggest problem was that nothing above the rank of captain went to see what the problem was. They just poured division after division and said, why aren't we making progress? Even the maps were rubbish. They were showing roads where no roads existed. So yeah, it was the Hurtgen. That could have been a game changer, definitely. Thank you, Randy.
And also to answer the first part of your question, I mean, really, it was you had really American ingenuity was really one. Oh
yeah.
No matter what it was that came upon, you could have an 18-year-old like a Francis Curry take over and pretty much assess the situation and
He
figure
gave
out
me
a way.
mouthful of defenses, didn't he?
Yeah.
Because I was introducing him. We were at Mike's alma mater in Siena College, upstate New York, Albany. And I said, now we have a Medal of Honor recipient who took out 5 tanks. And Francis Curry was a big guy. So, the man's a liar. I only took out 4 and the Stug 3. I said, that counts. That's like 5 tanks. What's your problem? You know, and my wife actually helped him put on his Medal of Honor. And I think it was one of the most auspicious things I've ever seen in my life. I was so proud. What a great man.
But yeah, I mean, that's the one thing. You know, these, of course, the German command, it was always whoever was in that higher rank, they knew what was going on. If something happened to them, well, you might be up a creek. But really, I think it was also tenacity. I mean, a lot of these American units who were out, the 106th, the 99th, the 28th. I mean, they held on. I mean, the 106th. A lot of people saw them as, oh well, they were, you know, overrun and captured. But if they didn't do what they did, with really, they were facing tanks with, you know, bazookas, and that was it. If it wasn't for that, the Battle of the Bulge probably would have been a very different battle itself.
Absolutely. That first 24 hours, if the 106th Division wouldn't have held those positions, they would run straight through to St. Vith. So yeah, any more questions, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one more question.
One more question.
One more question. Right here in the back.
You mentioned sort of that the fog helped the defense really with the Allies, and at least in the first 72 hours. So didn't the really the air shut down our primary technological superiority, which was our air superiority? So our primary advantage was effectively negated for the first 10 days. Is that
About the first 10 days, sorry.
right?
Yeah.
So basically, the weather effects, as I understand it,
It was a significant factor, sir, yeah.
for the Germans.
Well, both. Well, actually, you know, this is a strange thing that they called it Hitler weather. Hitler had actually promised them this weather. Now, I've lived in Belgium for 32 years with my lovely wife here, and I know that the Ardennes like the back of my hand. I love the area because it reminds me of the lowlands of Scotland. That's why. It's a beautiful area with pine trees and rolling hills. Great place. But every year, from about the end of October till well into January, the days start with dense mist. Now, sometimes the mist can go on for days and weeks, in fact. You see, what you have in the Ardennes is basically you have these low valleys with rivers that run at the base of the valleys, and you have pine trees, which are mostly Scots pines that were imported. A lot of these forests in the Ardennes are planted forests for logging. Naturally, you get that combination of cold weather dropping below a certain temperature, you're going to have mist, you're going to have fog. Now, in the defense of the Germans, they said, yeah, this is great, the Americans can't get any planes in the sky, we've got a carte blanche here, we're going to go straight through them. But the thing is, you see, their intel was good. Now, in the West Point manual, it will tell you that a division front is 5.5 miles. The 106th Division were covering...
Oh, God, it's a lot more than that.
26 miles.
6 miles, yeah.
The 99th Division, 31 miles. The 4th Division, 18 miles. The 28th Division was really strung out, almost 38 miles. But you see, the thing was, when the Germans attacked, they knew that the numbers weren't as big as theirs. But what they didn't know was, when they actually came to the encounters, was how many were on the other side. The 10th Armored Division took out 32 German tanks. They took on the whole 2nd Panzer Division. And the 2nd Panzer Division had no idea there was just a handful of guys and a handful of tanks at that position. So it kind of worked both ways, you know. But when the skies did clear, then I think you can say quite comfortably it was game over for the Germans. Because when you got those P-51s in the sky strafing the columns, and you got the bombers, well, it was game over. Absolutely. Thank you for your question, sir.